News First, Newsline with Faraz Shauketaly.
And very good evening to you and a warm welcome to Newsline Live. Now then, my guest this evening will hopefully put an answer to some of my prayers, and that was early last week. I made a prayer that at the throne speech there would be at least the announcement of one action plan to start the task of renewing the collection of dollars, earning dollars to resolve Sri Lanka's most immediate crisis, which is the lack of foreign exchange to pay for a variety of things. Sadly, of course, that was not the case, and so I thought I'd raise the question whether indeed there is a need to collect dollars, or whether whether the real need is to resolve the economic crisis that we are in, or whether the real need is for political survival. Let's find out whether Sri Lanka has a government fit for purpose. My guest this evening is Dr. Mahim Mendis, an academic and an activist, and also a senior lecturer at in communication studies at the Open University here. And also, of course, he's a member of the working committee of the SJB. Very good evening to you, Dr. Mahim Mendis. Thank you for coming.
Good evening.
Does Sri Lanka have a government fit for purpose? I ask this question because we still don't have enough dollars. Hotel rooms are empty. There's a moratorium in place, but that's about all the industry has been given. And in the meantime, we see lots of appointments and so on. So my real question to you is, does Sri Lanka have, in your observations, a government fit for purpose?
We do not have a government fit for purpose. How do we call a government which is not legitimate, which is not respected by the people, which is not reflective of the will of the people, as a government fit for the purpose?
You say that we do not have a legitimate government, but matters have gone to court and so on, and they have ruled that there is nothing wrong, because the parliament was elected by the people, and in these special circumstances where we have one president who quite literally ran away or abandoned the post because of whatever reason. The fact is that Parliament, under the rules, and it's been upheld that this is correct, under the terms of what is envisaged in the Constitution, they appointed somebody to take that person's place. So there is legitimacy.
It is an absolute shame, I should say, that even members of the so-called intelligentsia sometimes tell that we have a government that is constitutionally acceptable. We have a lawful government, but we are concerned about the spirit of democracy. A government that is respected by the people, reflective of the will of the people.
So what
nothing to do with constitutional government, you see, as they say, which may be lawful but not quite moral. Morality in governance is not reflected through what we have right now.
So what you're saying is that the system may well be constitutionally correct and therefore legal, but that it's morally wrong.
Absolutely.
So are you saying that when this parliament in place now has lost the moral right to be there, and so are you then saying that it's time that we had elections? Is that what you're saying, really?
If we cannot, in line with the uprising, the leaders of the uprising wanted this regime that mismanaged the economy, mismanaged social, political, economic, cultural, moral affairs of the state, of the Sri Lankan state, ousted. They were not talking about forming a government by themselves. They wanted people in parliament reflective of the opposition to come into a proper settlement with regard to a government by consensus among the people who are in opposition. If that is not possible, well, there is no other option than a general election, because it's a general election that can provide legitimacy to a process which is now illegitimate in the eyes of the people, both local and international. All the agencies, local and international, whether it be the IMF, whether it be the World Bank, think tanks, they all talk about the need for a respectable, legitimate regime that is able to evolve policies in line with a program acceptable to the people.
But Dr. Mendis, I put it to you that the real need of the hour, real need right now, is not about appointing failed politicians and others into various positions, ignoring the real crisis, which is the dollar crisis. We need, why can't we revive tourism immediately by giving whatever incentives need to be given? If it is to address the travel advisories being imposed in various countries advising against travel to Sri Lanka, which then doesn't allow the issuance of insurance policies, travel. Why can't we counter that by having policies issued by ourselves but underwritten over there as another incentive? Why can't we do that rather than be talking about governance, governance and governance? We've got a parliament. Shall we first sort this out and then get to the governance?
Well, at the end of the day, to do anything, we need a legitimate plan of action. We have a government which is now in the hands of someone who has been rejected electorally in every single electorate in the country, in 25 districts, in 9 provinces. Whatever plan of action that Mr. Wickramasinghe put forward as the leader of the United National Party was not acceptable to the people of this land. That is very clear. Now, how can we, through his leadership, expect cooperation from anyone, proper cooperation from anyone in Parliament, to put into effect a rejected plan of action? He had his manifesto, a policy statement, revival of tourism, revival of industry. All that was not acceptable to the people. Are we talking about a leadership whose plan of action had been rejected 2 years ago? Can that plan of action be respectable enough for anyone in Parliament with a mandate to support?
But he's not here as his party. Basically, he has been supported in his election by Parliament by members of the government of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, the SLPP, the Porto people, clearly voted for him. So are you then saying that he's a proxy of that party's political trajectory?
Absolutely. He has no moral right to even be a member of Parliament. He was not even a gazetted member of the national list of the United National Party. After 1 year, he appointed himself. Certainly not to the satisfaction of the very members of the national list of the United National Party, making it a mockery, the entire what the Constitution provides was made a mockery, I should say, perverting a process, creating very bad precedent.
But it was a process, Dr. Mendis, that the Supreme Court didn't find anything wrong. There may well be a lacuna in that aspect, because your reference to the national list and a nominee on the national list, the intention is to put that, what is in the rule books now, in the immediate aftermath of a general election. Mr. Wickremesinghe, of course, came into Parliament about 9 months later. But again, in the immediate aftermath of that, as far as he's concerned, of that election. So, again, it's back to this whole business of legality. That's the, however unacceptable it may well be, in some people's opinion, the fact is that the law is the law is the law, and therefore the Supreme Court didn't find anything wrong with that, and hence he's where he is. And several times this matter was also, in the case of Mr. Damika Pereira, the same thing, you know, and so the fact is he's there. You're saying, what you're saying is that even if it is legal, it is not morally legitimate, that he doesn't have the moral compass to be there.
Democratic governance, democratic government is all to do with value-centered governance, not value-neutral, neither here nor there. The judiciary of a country can uphold that which is as it is, not in line with the spirit of democracy. Members of the Supreme Court of any country should understand what is in line with the spirit of democracy and what is not in line with the spirit of democracy. Academically speaking, or spiritually speaking, a major crisis that we are confronted with is attitudinal bankruptcy in high places. We see very clearly that there is a very clear, organized effort in making black white, white black, and making concepts look like absurd. Absurd. Democratic governance requires very clearly whether the Constitution in the country approves this or not, whether the judiciary approves it or not. We are very clear. Those who are concerned about the democratic process in a country are very concerned about the spirit of concepts,
But if you're
of democracy.
But if you're talking about the law, and the law is the law is the law, we must all respect the law. Whether we think that it is morally right is not quite the point, because we're all talking about the law. When we say that they mismanaged the economy and that they departed from due process, those are all part of what we call about sticking to the due process is the law, because that's what the law says. Right? But let me put this to you, and thank you very much for your questions. 0772 300 305, preferably by SMS, but WhatsApp is fine. Your guest is off the mark. The guy who got 6.9 million votes then is rejected now. In the same way, a guy who was rejected then may be able to do something now that we are in hell. The viewer urges you to think differently. What do you have to say? Because times have changed drastically, that needs drastic action. And so, realistically, shouldn't you be looking at it differently?
We cannot look at things according to our whims and fancies. Very clearly, 6.9 million innocent people of this country, the voters, in a country where the majority live below poverty line, understood that there is a contract between they, the electors, and the people who want a mandate that we can call the social contract. social, economic, political, cultural, moral contract, a social contract. Very soon they realized, over the past 2 years, that this social contract is willfully, you can call it mismanagement of affairs. It had been violated to such an extent the people had no option whatsoever apart from protesting in the streets. Long before, the people gathered in Gotagama asking that the Gotabaya regime should come to an end. This Aragalaya, the uprising had started because of the manner in which the agricultural workers, the farmers, the fishermen, the education sector, many other sectors, the health sector, so many sectors were shabbily treated in an unprecedented manner, shabbily treated, willfully, almost willfully violating the social contract. 6.9 million people were disappointed. Now that is unprecedented in the political history of this land in post-independence period. Now, this gentleman who is asking the question is asking an interesting question. Whether social contract is violated, well, shouldn't we think differently? Are we going to think differently to bring a person totally rejected?
Let's discuss that in a moment, Dr. Mahim Mendis. We are now into a short break. We'll see you on the other side, shall we?
News First, Newsline with Faraz Shauketaly.
Joseph Stalin granted bail. Did the president speak to Joseph Stalin? Aragalaya activists arrested. Has the Gulf-based struggle come to an end?
මේ භූමියේ මේ වෙනකන් අපි සිදු කරගෙන ආපු අරගලයේ ප්‍රතිඵලයක් නැත්නම් අපි මේක හෙටින් නතර කරන්න ඕනේ.
What will the trade unions and mass organizations do tomorrow?
රටපුරා දැවැන්ත එක්දින ජාතික විරෝධතා ව්‍යාපාරයක් දියත් කරන්න අවශ්‍ය කරන සියලු කටයුතු මේ වෙනකොට සූදානම් කරලා තියෙනවා.
හෙට දවසේ අපි පෙන්නනවා මේ මුළු රට පුරාම එකම අරගල භූමියක් නිර්මාණය වෙනවා.
ඒ අරගලය අවසන් නැහැ. අරගලය නවතින්නේ නැහැ.
Gas prices dropped by litro. Damages caused due to inclement weather.
News First, Newsline with Faraz Shauketaly.
And welcome back to Newsline Live. I'm in conversation with Dr. Mahim Mendis, academic, activist and member of the working committee of the SJB, and also formerly on the national list there. Now then, Dr. Mahim Mendis, we've got so many questions and so on, but there's one person who's saying that after all, Mr. Wickremesinghe is doing his bit, and you know, in terms of the petrol, the energy, the fuel. What do you have to say about that?
Well, what do we mean by his response? He's doing his bit. What has he done up to now?
Well,
21 days have gone.
Yeah.
Well, what is the plan of action he has put forward in order to resolve the petroleum crisis? What has he done?
What about the oil tanks?
Oil tanks, well, I remember during the Yahapalana regime, the petroleum minister, I think he was Chandima Virakudi.
Petroleum resources development.
He brought a proposal with regard to the oil tanks in Trincomalee and to be used productively, and with regard to the management of oil tanks.
Well, yes, they basically, what that was is they wanted to give some of them to one company and another another
yes,
equal amount.
Exactly. I was just thinking about that.
Yes.
And now what made Mr. Chandima Virakudi reverse that? Who was an impediment, a barrier to the proposal that he brought? Wasn't Mr. Wickramasinghe responsible for reversing whatever proposal that was put forward by Mr. Chandima Virakudi?
But yes,
that's the question that I put forward.
There is actually a cabinet paper to that effect.
I believe so.
And today, in President Rajapaksa's administration, we had Mr. Udayagaman and so on, who put another proposal forward, and that was to jointly develop those, where the government of Sri Lanka through SPETCO would hold 51% and the others would hold 49%, which is almost similar to what Mr. Virakudi proposed all those years ago. So basically what you're saying is that there is a contradiction in terms.
Contradiction with regard to Mr. Wickramasinghe's leadership. Over and over again, we have seen self-contradictory positions. It is like talking about Mr. Joseph Stalin, his arrest under his regime, where he had every reason to get him probably arrested. Now, wasn't he the person sometime back when Mr. Joseph Stalin was arrested, made a speech in Parliament that we have to be very careful in arresting someone like Joseph Stalin, who is greatly respected even by the international community, that we would lose the GSP Plus if we take careless decisions of this nature with regard to fundamental rights violations, undermining of democracy. Now what he says, with regard to petroleum during Mr. Chandima Virakudi's time, or with regard to Joseph Stalin's arrest, well, there is no consistency. Of course, when there is no legitimacy with regard to someone holding high office like the office of the president, we do not expect consistency in reasoning. There cannot be consistency in reasoning because it is a regime that is being formed for some other purpose, not for the purpose of fulfilling the demands and the aspirations of the people of this country, but for a different purpose, probably at this moment of time to give breathing space for the very leaders who have been ousted. That is absolutely inconsistency in reasoning then and now with regard to Mr. Wickramasinghe's leadership and his reasoning.
But Dr. Mendis, I hear what you say and so on. But now then, tell me what about the SJB? Your party has announced that you all are willing to help in this sort of national government, but not by having ministerial portfolios. Can you really make a difference by sitting in the various committees in Parliament?
A responsible democratic, modern democratic party. We are not talking about the United National Party. We are talking about a distinctly modern political party called the SJB Samagi Jana Balavegaya. We are the alternative government in line with the will of the people. We consider it important to cooperate with a government. With a government, we have to cooperate. We are not a destructive influence on the process of governance when the country is in total crisis. Even the policy statement that was presented in Parliament, the leader of the opposition was not engaging himself in destructive criticism. All what he said was, it is the obligation of Mr. Wickramasinghe, whether he has legitimacy or not as president, he should walk his talk.
Now,
and the parliamentary opposition will ensure...
What's wrong with the SJB walking the talk? Why do you now regret that your party didn't take on, lock horns and accept President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's call for anyone to come and take it on and work for the betterment
We
of
had
the
an
people.
honorable leader in dishonorable politics and a dishonorable political culture in this land. We had an honorable leader in Mr. Sajith Premadasa, who did not want to betray the leaders of the uprising, who wanted a corrupt, incompetent leader out. Gota, go out. Right.
I'd
In
like
such
to,
a context.
Yeah. I think I hope that you're using that term loosely because you don't want to have any legal problems. But, you know, okay, let's just say that the people wanted Gotabaya Rajapaksa out because of the mismanagement of the economy, and that's also part of a court case right now. But at the time, you know, Mr. Premadasa didn't want to take it on. He now, his position is the same. We don't want any positions. But my question is not that. My question is whether the main opposition party in this country can make a real contribution to immediately getting on with the job of finding dollars by sitting in committees. That's my question.
This government is not implementing the program that was put forward by the Samagi Jana Balawegya at the general elections, or before that the presidential election. All what the SJB can do in Parliament is to contribute towards policy development, implementation, and also provide checks and balances on behalf of the people, productively and constructively contribute towards the special committees, the oversight committees.
Dr. Mendis, I don't mean to sort of not pay attention to those matters, but does the SJB in that case have their own action plan, and why can't they, if they are assisting this government, why can't they share that action plan with the President, who happens to be Mr. Wickremesinghe?
Mr. Wickremesinghe has gained power, or grabbed power.
He's hardly grabbed it. He's hardly grabbed it.
Pardon?
He's hardly grabbed it because the Parliament voted it.
Right, with the help of the very regime and the party that have been ousted, he has taken control of Parliament, control of the executive, and in such a context, all what he should be doing is to put forward his action plan and implement it. Whether he's capable of doing that, of course, is a big question, because this is not a party which has any talent anymore, because the best minds of the United National Party, I think, crossed over legitimately to a new party, and they formed that party, and that party was not victorious at the last general elections, and Mr. Wickremesinghe is not expected to implement the policies of the Samagi Jana Balawegya.
But in a national government, and as President Wickremesinghe said, in a national government, it's not just the opinion of one party or one person, but it's a collection of ideas, and that they must all work together with the one thing in mind: the elimination of the current very heavy burden and the social distress of the people of our country.
When we talk about an all-party government, all-party consensus, we are not talking about some ideas that are coming from certain individuals in Parliament, but we're talking about the need for political parties officially coming together to reach consensus on the way forward. There's absolutely no possibility in doing that, because the legitimate opposition is not in a position to morally cooperate with an immoral, from a governance point of view, with an illegitimate a regime that is not having the blessings and representative of the will of the people.
Dr. Mahim Mendis, thank you very much for being on Newsline Live. We've now come to the end of our program today. After a short message, it's time for the primetime news from the News First Primetime News team. In the meantime, take care, have a great week ahead of you, and as always, God bless you all.